The Australian Ghost Whisperer with Katerina Legato and James Jennings. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Australian Ghost Whisperer. I'm James Jennings, I'm with Katerina Legato as always. Hi Katerina.
Hello James and hello everybody, welcome to our podcast and YouTube channel.
Yes, welcome indeed. Now we are doing a very special episode today that is going to focus on how everyone can play a part in healing country and what we can do to actually do that. So we are actually very lucky to have a special guest with us today to discuss that. It is Brett Groves, Wiradjuri, who is an artist and has a wonderful art store in Leura. Welcome, Brett, and tell us about your store, please.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. So Bilangara Indigenous Art and Culture. Bilangara is a Wiradjuri word, and it means care and respect. So everything I do and make and be is with care and respect.
Wonderful.
And so I just felt that the mountains was missing an authentic cultural space. And there were, places selling Chinese boomerangs. So I just thought, wow, we need to do something about that. So opened up Bilangara during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. And I just wanted to create a space for First Nations people to have a voice and to play a part in healing country and to give First Nations people a place to have an income and reinstate pride and all those things and just provide a space where people could come in and share stories about either being First Nations or not. And there are a lot of people who are just finding out they're Aboriginal and talking about that. So, yeah.
It's such a beautiful store.
Thank you.
And I love the energy of the store. It feels so authentic, and I felt this amazing connection to the First Nation people when I walked into the store. So I encourage you all. So many of you come to the mountains, please visit this store and support Brett and all the good work and everything that he represents in his store. It's truly amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And talking to Brett earlier, I was surprised to hear that you've only just started painting quite recently, because your paintings are amazing. Like I said, before we did today's episode, I've earmarked one that I need to save up for, which I'm quite fond of. So you've only been painting for a little while.
Yeah, so I was looking for artists and we couldn't find any at the time. So somebody said, why don't you give it a crack? So I did. And it worked out well. And I think that's because it's part of my storytelling. That's part of my journey. And I've got a message to get out there. And so through my art, it's a way of doing that. So
do you also feel the ancestors connecting with you when you're painting? Because I feel that's what happens.
Oh my gosh!
I feel you're being inspired by the ancestors coming in.
You're giving me the goosebumps again.
To paint.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So I had no idea what I was doing. I just took a canvas and I did a dot, because that's everyone knows the dot style. So I just did that, and literally the first dot I did, I released it, and all the stress of the pandemic and business failures and all that sort of stuff, it just released, and I just had this instant connection to culture, which I'd never had before growing up, because we grew up in a very racist time where being Indigenous was not spoken about. It was not something to be proud of.
Sad.
So, that was the start of the journey.
So this is also bringing the healing to your trauma and everything you've been through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I
very
do
much
feel,
so.
You're here to be a voice for them. You're here to represent
absolutely.
the ancestors of this land, which is beautiful.
I listen to Gurumul and Uncle Archie Roach as I'm singing, as I'm painting, and I listen to their stories, and very nice.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah, and I guess the way that we've all come together is a little serendipitous, which is Katerina finding your store, and then Brett, you also saw a previous episode of ours where we talked about the trauma that's embedded in our country due to the awful things that have happened in the past to the Indigenous population, and how the country holds on to that trauma.
Absolutely.
And we actually have to be conscious of that and find ways to heal that trauma. So healing country is very much the theme of today's episode, and I know that you have a lot of thoughts on it. So can you maybe tell us a bit about, connection to country, and then we can get on to, I guess, the importance of healing.
It's such
Perhaps some methods of how to heal.
Yeah, it's such a big, massive topic, isn't it? Because I guess, the thing that we need to remember is that First Nations people have lived here since the Dreamtime. And then, colonisation happened a couple of 100 years ago, and the white man did their very best to erase, all of that. Eradicate people and culture and language and ways of being. And
it's sad.
Yeah, so and I call it the great misleducation. So I say we were rather than being educated, we were misled, and we were not told the truth, and we're still not told the truth. And that's why a lot of people come into our store and they still say the silly things like, "Oh, you don't look Aboriginal," or why are you all just looking out for handouts, and why do you live in the past? And we get those comments, and I say to my staff, it's very, very hurtful and painful, but I say this is our opportunity to gently lead these people and educate them, and just sort of open their minds as to why we're in this situation.
Absolutely.
So how do we go about healing country? And it's also interesting because non-Indigenous people come in and they're nervous, and they're like, well, I don't want to be disrespectful, and what do I say and don't say and do and don't do? And I just say, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it with good intention, that's the main thing. But I guess the starting point is truly acknowledging what happened in this country. No more of the sweeping it under the carpet.
That's right. Pretending that it doesn't exist.
It never happened. So the reality is, so I'm Wiradjuri, and the estimation is 90. So Wiradjuri is the largest Aboriginal nation in New South Wales, and the estimation is 90% of my people were murdered. So 90%, and you hear about the whole country, and I think it was within 100 years that 80% of the Indigenous population was wiped out. So and people don't know that. So it's just about acknowledging that. Is our starting point.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that did happen, and that has the knock-on effect to this very day, and that's why we don't live in the past. We're living with what has happened, what hasn't been acknowledged, and that's sitting with us. And the land holds memory,
of course,
and we have intergenerational trauma. Regardless of whether you're Indigenous or not, we all have it, and it's there because it hasn't been dealt with.
And it inflames trauma within people, because it's like we're living on land that's traumatized. Then we all have our own traumas, and everything becomes much more inflamed.
Yep. And it's funny, we were talking before we came on here about the local waterways, and how I just went to a local fall here, and I just saw all the tourists just sort of frolicking in this waterway, and I could just feel that this was a sacred place, and something special happened here. I don't know what, but I felt it might have been a women's birthing place or something, and we need to know those things, So I always say, just find a local Indigenous person in your area, and find out about what happened on this land, and we just need to start respecting that, I think.
That's right. And when we visit the mountains, when we visit these sacred spaces, we need to come with gratitude, love, respect for the people of the land, and also by acknowledging what actually happened to them.
Yep. And I always say, because I was adopted, and I say that happened for a reason, because that gives me empathy with understanding the stolen generation. We've got to remember that we were family people, and we were clans, and the white man came along and not only took us off our land since the Dreamtime, also separated our families and pulled them apart. And so there are people still with us alive today who don't know their mothers and fathers and great aunties, and that has a massive effect on people's lives. So
How did it affect you when you were adopted? Were you adopted out to white people? If you don't mind sharing that with us.
Interesting story. So we only just recently found out that I was adopted. Both my natural parents are Wiradjuri, and I was adopted out to a dark-skinned Aboriginal man and a white mother. But we only found out recently that she actually has Indigenous heritage as well, but it's not talked about, so she's not too sure about it. So my adopted father was actually the son of my natural grandmother. So I was actually connected, and that was his little purpose in life, to bring me to that. And So being adopted, you sort of feel worthless and unwanted, and that separation and not knowing your heritage. So I can empathise with the stolen generation for those reasons.
Yeah. And we've talked about trauma a lot on this show, and how one of the key aspects of healing trauma is, I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but it's acknowledging it. It's acknowledging that it exists.
Yeah.
And to me, anyone who doesn't acknowledge the horrors that have happened to the Indigenous population of this country, it shows a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
And empathy is sadly in short supply in this day and age.
I'll say.
But it doesn't take too much to actually just recognise these things happened.
Yeah.
And as you said, there is a knock-on effect, which of course there is. So I get, my blood boils when I hear things like, "Oh, why don't you just get over it?" It's like, and a comment like that is completely devoid of empathy, because it's like, if you're in that situation, how would you feel? How would you feel if all of your history, your family, your culture has been decimated?
Absolutely.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Anyone who says that, I do not want to be a peaceful man. It makes me very angry.
It must be so difficult for you to stay calm when somebody's saying that to you.
As I said, we all grew up being misled, so I can understand that. So we just need. Luckily, there's a shift, and I love the primary school teachers who come into Bilangara because they're educating the kids the truth from the very beginning, and the talking language, and so it's a good shift. Yeah.
So let's maybe talk. I want to ask about spirituality and connection to country, because I think that's something that a lot of people probably aren't aware of or a bit miseducated on, and I think that it's something that people need to learn a lot about, because the spirituality of the Indigenous population is obviously stretches back thousands of years, and
they were very ancient.
Like there's ancient knowledge and things there that have been dismissed because of people's attitudes, which I think is such a massive shame, because there's so much to learn. So
we just had this deep connection, and we say that we didn't own the land, we were part of the land. And just had such. It saddens me to see creeks these days, and you see the sign saying "Don't go in the creek," and there's trolleys in creeks. Well, these creeks were our lifelines, since the dream time. So,
do you feel like dream time was the time where they went into the inner vision, where they were able to tap into their inner vision? That's how I sort of feel dream time was for them. It was their time where they perhaps fasted or did particular rituals that would take them within, where they were able to perhaps see into the future, go back into the past. I feel like dream time was their opportunity to tap into the ancient wisdoms of the past ancestors. So I feel, to me, that's what dream time represents, a time where they fully went within. And we would, the equivalent of perhaps going into your own inner world and accessing your lineage.
Wow.
That's how I feel the dream time was.
That's so beautiful.
And it was through their dreaming that they accessed teachings and wisdoms and made contact with their ancestors.
Amazing.
Perhaps they were pre-warned of the times that were to come also. I feel that they were pre-warned of the times ahead, where they would be in, this situation, this tragic situation, and how perhaps they were able to prepare at a spirit and soul level for those times of where their lives were going to be obviously taken, and what was to be of their children. I feel like, to me, when I tap into it, that's how I feel that's how they accessed the wisdom, the past, the future.
Beautiful. It's such a shame we've lost that. You know what I mean?
And I think people overall now are beginning to want to develop more of their own intuition, their psychic abilities, and tap into the inner world, because our DNA holds all the memory, our spirit holds the memory of where we've been, where we're going. So tapping into that, I feel people are trying now to tap into that more and more.
Yeah, I hear that's where we're headed as human beings. Is that right?
Yeah, this is the path to enlightenment. We have so much to learn from history. We have so much to learn from the ancestors of this country, of Australia, because they lived in harmony with everything. Whereas, what have we all done? We've come here, we've absolutely
Destroyed it.
Destroyed the harmony with nature.
Yeah.
We've destroyed everything. I mean, I'm horrified when I go for walks in the mountains, where I see people have left behind rubbish for their calm. They've had a picnic and just left their rubbish.
Yeah.
It just absolutely just does my head in. Is how disconnected. I mean,
so disrespectful. It's
yeah.
I find it really hard because, like, you take the bushfires, for example, that just happened, and that was because of how we've just mistreated the land. And so the traditional way was to, if you had one gum tree, it would be given its space to grow in its entirety, whereas now they're just, up against each other, and that's why the fires took off the way they did. So it's really sad for me to walk on country and see, the white man described it, the whole country, as parkland when they arrived, because it was just so beautiful and pristine. And I was just up at on Dunghutti country, which is the north coast, and I just find it really sad to walk country and see no Indigenous people engaging with the land. Like, it's on the waterways, and you see all the crabs and the mussels and the mangroves, and just to see no Indigenous people living in that and amongst that, I find that really hard and really sad. It just feels really empty. So I feel that's another way of healing country, is bringing that back. I was at Scenic World here in the Blue Mountains the other day, and I was just, just felt like a theme park, and I was just looking at all these people engaging, and they were just treating it like a theme park, but it's not a theme park. It's Gundungurra country, and it has been since the dream time. So, and I was looking at these big rocks and the trees and ferns, and I wanted to hear the stories about this land, so that I can engage with it deeper, which is another way of healing country.
And Katarina, you had a recent experience, didn't you, nearby, that you'd like to tell us about?
Yes. So I went for a walk to Minnehaha Falls, and I found a little quiet space to meditate in, because I could feel the presence of the beautiful spirits of the Indigenous women. And so I went into my meditative state, and the visions were coming very clear, and they were showing me how the lagoon there that people swim in was a sacred lagoon, where it was a women's space where they would go to give birth, where they would separate themselves when it was that time of the month from the men, and they would stay there over the course of their menstrual cycle. It was also a place of wailing, where the women would go there if they'd had, lost their baby, if there had been complications in the birth, where they had lost, their little one. And so they were quite upset that this was now being again used as a place of, just fun, and everybody's jumping in the lagoon. And I know that sounds like it is a lot of fun, but this was very sacred space, and they cherish the memories, even though they are in spirit. They are still cherishing the memories of that earthly existence that they had there. So they desired that this would be spoken about, that perhaps the men could swim in a lagoon that was men's space, and that the women that would just swim in this space, but also acknowledge that they were coming into a very sacred space. The best way I can give an example of it is that, like, here in our society we have maternity hospitals, for example, and how would women feel if men were allowed to come in and have a beer in there, or, you know, have a burger while they're there and waiting for, whilst women were giving birth? And it's, you see, it's the same disrespect. We, as women, if you were going to give birth in a maternity, you wouldn't like to know that there were men somewhere having a beer and a laugh, and, you know, and they feel the same about their space. So I feel that, I feel that we have come together to express the wishes and desires of the ancestors of this country.
And how beautiful would it be if we can bring that back? You know, like, and think about the Aboriginal women, so that they would have been the Kadumba clan. Imagine having that and then being taken away from land and taken away from that, like what that does to your spirit.
Yeah. Well, it continues what it does to their spirit. It continues to hold that pain for them as they're watching this, as they're aware of this disrespect. You know, that's what I felt from what they were showing me. Yeah,
it's interesting how the spirits they find their little way to come back, though, because at Katoomba, at the gully, that was a sacred place, you know, since Dreamtime, and then the people were kicked off that land and they built a raceway. And my understanding is that because they built on waterways, the billabongs kept coming through and causing water to run across these raceways and causing crashes, and so that's why they eventually had to shut down the raceway. So I find that interesting, that spirit and ancestor coming through saying, no.
Yes.
And it's nice because that area is now being regenerated as a cultural space.
Wonderful.
So that's another way of healing country.
Would you say, what would be some techniques that perhaps we could use that are obviously that are in harmony with the whole culture? Could you speak about perhaps some of the cultural techniques that perhaps...
I mean, what drew me to you guys is I watched your session about how you suggested that we just go out to our own backyards and literally just sit down, connect. Because one thing I did when I moved back to Wiradjuri country, I went and placed my hands on the earth and introduced myself to the land, and just listened to what the ancestors had to say, and they said, you'll be safe. So that's one thing that all of us can do, Indigenous or not. Just go, as you say, go to your yard, put your hands on the earth and just say, I'm here to care and respect you. So that's one thing. And I like to think about how we were sustainable people, and we cared for country and we didn't use and abuse. And so an example is one gum tree, we would, they're called scar trees. So we would take from that tree timber to make a canoe, so method of transport. And then we would also use some timber to make our bowls, and our shields and our hunting weapons. But we would only take so much of this tree, and then we would put mud over that tree scar. And so that tree remained for hundreds and hundreds of years, yet it gave to us. You know, it's that kind of thing that I feel we need to get back to. And as like I was saying about the creeks before, like, let's get back to our waterways and clean them up and get the fish going again. And water's a very cleansing thing, like you're talking about with the birthing place. Like, let's get that all back, rather than trashing the earth. Let's be part of it again.
And in terms of there being sacred spaces around as well, if people want to learn about, if there might be a space that is near them that is a sacred space and they may or may not should go there. Are there places they can go to learn about that?
Yeah, so reach out. So there might be your local Aboriginal land council as a starting point, or there'll be Facebook pages, but just reach out to a local elder and find out. But I always say, I did an artwork recently, and it was about sacred places, sacred women's spaces and sacred men's spaces. And the point of this artwork was to say, you know how when you go to a place and you get that weird feeling? Well, that weird feeling is probably because you are on a birthing place or you're on an old song line. So that's the land talking to you.
Yeah, and the land does speak to our souls.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's constant communication. Once you just get into that quiet space, you're very able to tune in, tap in and say, do I feel right here? Does this feel right? Should I be here? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think...
Sorry?
Yeah, and I just think we need to be mindful. Like, think about, like the Great Western Highway as an example. Like that they're built on song lines. These were so our roads were called song lines. And just think about that disconnect. That creates, and the wildlife. It always upsets me to see the amount of roadkill on the roads. Like these are our totems. It's not just rodents. The kangaroos and the wombats and the echidnas you see on the road. Like it just kills me inside. We need to just slow down.
You have respect. Slow down. Not be running them over.
Yeah,
for heaven's sake.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as Katarina touched upon, as you said, because you had entered that sacred women's space at the falls, is ask permission or to pay. Like, is that a good technique?
Yeah,
as well?
Ask permission before you jump in, before you can swim there. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, I have no intentions of swimming in there. I respect what was shown to me, and I don't feel any need to swim in a space that holds so much energy and presence of their lives here.
Yep. And we all need healing, and so we can all benefit from leaving that space as a healing space, leaving that water.
Perhaps I would say, it's okay to perhaps sit there, meditate, connect with the women. It's a beautiful healing space. Like they had, as much as they were sad, there was also these beautiful smiles. They were happy that I was listening to their story, that as they told me their story and showed me the visions, and I felt really just so moved and touched to be shown the visions, and just what an incredibly beautiful, special space that is.
Well, but that explains why I always had a bad feeling about coming to North Katoomba. I thought that there were massacres, but I was just recently told that it was a women's space. So, yeah. And there was a time where I went with a friend to Blackfellows Cave near Lithgow, and she is a non-Indigenous person, and she acknowledged the First Nations people and said to the land and the ancestors that she was coming here with no harm. And she took a photo of some hands on a cave, and her phone just started going off hundreds and hundreds of times, taking hundreds of photos. And we looked back at that photo later on, and all you could see was this ancestor's warrior's face and hundreds of women and children all around. So it's very interesting how the land and spirit can still get through to us, regardless of whether you're First Nations or not.
That's right, because we're all part of
spirit, energy.
Yeah, we are. That's right.
And Katarina, you've spoken a lot in the past as well about how, in a spiritual sense, how important it is to commune with nature. I know that when you talk about clearing yourself, healing yourself, you always talk about go for a walk in nature, get barefoot in nature, spend some time. And I know you do a lot of nature walks. So
yes.
you've
It's exactly why I had to get out of living in the inner west to being in the mountains, because I felt that this was the only place where I could receive the healing, the nurturing, the strength that I needed from nature to be able to continue my journey and my work in helping people.
Yeah. And how do we all play our part in bringing back the wildlife? Like where I live, like there's the gang cockatoo. Like how do we another way to heal country is just, find out what trees those birds like or the koalas like. And, that's just another little way of bringing back what should not have been erased.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I would like to say that another way to heal country is...
Yes, let's talk about techniques.
All right.
And more
All right, let's start.
techniques.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's interesting. So we have the First Nations map in Bilangara as you walk in, and it's interesting to see the amount of Australians who will walk in and say, "What is that?" These are our nations that have been here since the Dreamtime, and even us Australians don't necessarily know that. And so I think one little journey I'm taking myself on is learning all those nations' names. There's hundreds and hundreds, but we should all know them. The same as we know our states and capital we should know these nation names. And, there's hundreds and hundreds of languages. We travel overseas to learn another language and to see man-made structures that are thousands and thousands of years old. We have hundreds of languages here, and we have the world's oldest man-made structure in this country. So let's engage with that and let's educate ourselves.
That is so true.
Yeah, that's great. Very,
Learn more
very good
about
advice.
our history.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Because it's a history that goes back to Dreamtime, and we're, as an Australian, you are part of that story,
That's
regardless of whether you're an Indigenous or not.
There's a sole purpose why we're here.
Correct.
Why we've chosen in this incarnation to be here in Australia.
Yep.
That's how I feel about it.
Absolutely.
My history is Italian, but there's a much higher, bigger purpose why I'm here in Australia.
Yep.
And living in these incredible mountains. Yeah. What was the ceremonies, the smoking ceremonies? What were they about?
So when you entered another nation, you would have a smoking ceremony, and you would come with a message stick, and the message stick would have your purpose for coming into another nation. But you'd have a smoking ceremony to cleanse any bad spirit, and to let this mob know that you're coming with peace and goodwill.
Oh, how wonderful. So were they using the eucalyptus
Yes,
leaves for this? As now people are using the sage. Were they using the eucalyptus leaves to smoke?
So you could use a range of things. So like I've got a native cherry, a wattle and a eucalyptus. And so with each different leaf, one would represent a different thing. So one might represent your mob, one might represent my mob, and one might represent our work together healing country, or it might represent the waterways or the sky or the land.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? It's beautiful.
Yep.
Just beautiful.
Very cleansing.
Very cleansing. So would you like to talk about the...
Oh, yes. Shall I grab this?
Grab it.
Yep.
Yes. Surprise.
So for anyone who's listening, maybe we should explain what you've got there.
So this is a great example of why I created Bilangara, because this boomerang is made by a dad and his young daughter, and so that's how they connect, as we did since Dreamtime, father and daughter or father and son. So he makes them and the daughter paints them. So again, just bringing back that connection with family. It's an educational piece as well, just telling people, obviously it was a tool back in the day.
Were women allowed to use the boomerang? Or
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
As I say, I'm just sort of taking myself on my journey. Not 100% sure. I feel like I want to say yes, but I can't be certain. Yeah. One thing I've learnt recently is the didgeridoo. So the Indigenous word for didgeridoo is yidaki, and so that traditionally was only played by men, and because it became part of the man. Interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't. I actually bought this from your store. I felt so connected to it, but I haven't felt any need to go in the backyard and play around. It just, it's like just a sacred.
Yeah.
To me, it's just this beautiful sacred piece of amazing workmanship.
Yep.
Well, I think what you said is what's beautiful about it to me is that the father and the daughter of
Yeah,
one another.
that's
beautiful.
That connection.
That's a beautiful story in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Spending time doing that rather than on iPhones.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that, that instills cultural pride in that young girl, and that provides an income for her. She's not out of school yet, so it just sets her on this path, Interesting talking about the women, and I going to the creeks that I talk about and how women used to be big fisher. We say fishermen these days, but the women were the big fishing.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. The women were the fishermen, and
yes,
the men probably did more of the hunting.
Might have been off with the
I feel like it's more of a male.
So do I.
Yeah,
now that
I
we
do
sit
feel. I
here
don't.
with it.
That's my vibe with it, but I'm no expert.
Yeah.
No, wonderful.
So another way to heal country is to think about the amount of Indigenous people incarcerated. Now that's something that's happened since colonisation and part of the things we've talked about today. So another way of healing country is getting in with all of these people and getting that cultural pride reinstated, so that, I think that's something that's lacking, not just for Indigenous people, for all people. And I think that all of us, by connecting to this country's culture, can just be far better human beings all around.
Yeah, I've had conversations in the past where I've said, we, because of the rich history and culture from the First Nations people in this country, we should be so proud. It should be such a huge source of pride.
History.
But it's just, there's so much beauty and so much to be proud of, and you just don't see it. You just don't see it. And
I remember being on a primary school excursion up to La Perouse and just hearing that there were caves that were concreted over. And that just sums it up, that's what's happened. So we need to pull all that concrete back and expose. And
That's right.
Better late than never.
And I mean, you look at Europe, people go on tours to Europe. Like, for example, in Rome, I remember my parents taking me to Rome to see the Colosseum. And I just felt such a terrible vibe in there because it was a place of just killings. But yet, they've managed, Italy as a country to hold on to their history, and they're so proud. And there's bus tours of, thousands and thousands of people every year going through to see these places that are not even happy places. I felt quite traumatized in there, for example. And yet here in Australia, we just disregard the history of Australia, of the Indigenous, and it's really so sad.
I always say we place so much importance on learning about Ned Kelly. When we had so many warriors and heroes, since the Dreamtime, we should be learning about them. And that's who we should be naming our streets after, not people that ordered the murder of Indigenous people.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
It's another way of potentially healing country as well, to think about those street names that are, there's names that are called Boundary Street, and that is literally because it was the boundary where the blacks couldn't cross. So renaming those streets.
Renaming,
those
we
places.
all need to speak up and have everything, have these streets renamed. For that's the true purpose of why we've met.
Absolutely.
And,
It's
be a voice.
It's a big project, but
be a voice for the ancestors.
Somewhere.
And this is a beautiful beginning of awareness and acknowledgement and of gratitude, and just feeling quite blessed that we are able to do it.
Yep. Absolutely.
And finally acknowledging that this is sacred land.
Thank goodness there's a shift in people and spirit that people want to hear this and acknowledge it and work with it.
And it's a beautiful thing to acknowledge it and acknowledging it from your heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing.
It is amazing. Well, Brett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you both.
It's been a really enlightening chat, and I hope people who've been listening or watching can take a lot away from it, and we'd love to have you back on again sometime to chat some more.
It's a big topic, so I'm sure we can talk for forever.
Yeah.
For sure. And perhaps we'll ask our viewers and listeners if they have questions that perhaps we can have Brett back that they would have questions that they can send to us so that we can put these questions forward to you, Brett.
If you don't mind, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm no expert, but I can only talk from the heart and
Exactly.
and
I
talk with
think
good
that's-
intent. So
Yeah, and that's what all our intention is, to bring harmony, peace, and gratitude, hey, for the past and for this beautiful land that we all live upon.
Yeah.
I always said, if only the black and white came together to create beautiful things, that's what we could have done from the start. So
But it's never too late.
never too late, exactly.
And I think
That's
the
it.
future generations, I think there is a shift, and I think that the future generations will come
Absolutely.
together with the First Nation people and live in balance and equality. And that's exactly all that needs to happen.
I love it when the little kids come into Bilangara and they tell me what the Aboriginal symbols are, or they talk to me in language. It's just beautiful. It just gives those little kids a sense of, this country's pride. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you again, Brett.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you, Katerina.
Thank you, James. It's been an amazing, amazing journey that we have taken with you, Brett. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the ancestors of
Absolutely.
this country. We thank them for helping us to come together to do this podcast today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're hearing them.
We're hearing them.
Yep.
Oh, for sure. Definitely hearing them and honouring them with so much love and honour. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
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 To gain access to private spiritual development classes, guided meditations, and live Q&As with Katerina, please visit www.patreon, that's patreon.com/The Australian Ghost Whisperer.